Hey, before we get into the episode, I just want to tell you about my free astrology newsletter called the Starzologer. It comes out every Sunday. It's of a lot of interest for astrologers. I explore cosmic currents moving through the ever-changing skies. Most weeks I explore what's coming up in the week and also share some astrology sticky bits and throw in some ideas about buzzing around. You also get stretched with my Extend Yourself sections. So this newsletter is for aspiring astrologers or anyone who's trying to up their astrological knowledge. It's totally free and you can sign up at starzology.com/newsletter. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to the Starzology Astrology Podcast. I'm your host, Alison Price, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Arwynne O'Neill.
Hello, Alison. It's great to be here again.
So nice to have you once more. So in this episode, it's one of our Q&A episodes. This is our 125th podcast episode that we are recording.
Yay! Happy 125th.
I know. I cannot believe we got here. I don't know how you feel, but when we look back to the beginning, it seemed way down the road. And yet here we are.
It seems like these come faster and faster.
Yeah.
It's like we just had the hundreds and now it's like 125.
125.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so for those of you who have been following along, every 25th episode, so 125th, we do Q&A, which are questions that our listeners have sent in.
Yeah.
And you can send your questions in by clicking the link on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and send your question in. And we're going to be answering as many questions as we can in this episode that have come from our listeners, which are all over the place.
Yeah.
So
totally. And if you asked a question and we haven't gotten to it, maybe it's because we're waiting to do an entire episode on it.
That's true.
Or maybe we just didn't get enough information from your question and we were like, what? What are you talking about?
I know. And if you do send in a question, please put your name at the end. That does help us all.
Yeah. And be specific as you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Arwynne, what's our first question?
Well, so we have also been doing our political astrology series. We did Donald Trump's chart. We did Kamala Harris's chart. And we are going to be doing another, at least one before the election. So this is a bit of a time-bound thing, but it's always interesting because these questions are going to, continue to be interesting regardless of who wins.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so this is a question from one of our listeners who says, has anyone managed to find Tim Walz's birth chart? That is the running mate for Kamala Harris. And he would be her vice president, and he is he's an Aries. We know that much. April 6th, 1964. So he's the same year as her, and just about 6 months younger. But there is no birth time, sadly.
Right.
And he's also born on one of those days where his moon is in question. So it would either be an Aquarius or Capricorn.
Okay.
We don't have anything near birth time. Yeah. So no one has found that. If anyone does find that, please send us the info.
Well, we had the same issue when Obama came in, that he didn't present his birth certificate.
Well, that not actually 100% accurate. Donald Trump said that he hadn't, but everyone knew he was born in Hawaii, and he had a birth certificate.
But it wasn't presented to astrologers for a while. It wasn't.
Yeah, and also, I mean, my God, what's her name? Hillary Clinton. Still, we're
still waiting.
This is the big one. We are still waiting. And what a Scorpio thing that is. Oh, I just don't want anyone to know.
Yeah,
Come on.
Sure.
Come on.
Now, let's face it, not all birth certificates have their time on them.
No, it's true. And you have to actually request to have that, the additional thing. Unfortunately.
So as far as I'm aware, nobody has the birth time for Tim Walz.
No.
So you would then cast a noontime chart and go for it from there.
Yeah, it's
what can I say? We have the same problem with other people who don't have a birth time. You do your best.
A ton of people. And if there's famous people, we tend to do noon. And if they're not famous, I mean, I just do a sunrise chart.
Do you? Oh, no, I always do noon. But
interesting.
Anyway.
Okay. Well, that's a different. The reason I do that is because then the ascendant would be where the sun is.
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do noon because then the moon can only be 12 hours out. So whatever. So we have this with a lot of people. Yes,
we do. A lot of people.
So as we speak, we don't have his time. And when it comes to light, we'll certainly look into it. Yeah. Why not? If she gets elected, we'll look into it. If not, probably
then all the astrologers will be like pitchforks,
Exactly.
demanding the time. Show us the birth certificate. Only
Yes.
because we need to know.
Yeah. So that's a classic problem that people don't have a time of birth.
Exactly. And the second part of this question, though, which is super interesting, is every other presidential candidate in this race, including apparently J.D. Vance, has a AA rating.
Yes.
What is a Rodden rating?
Yes. So Rodden rating in astrology. So Lewis Rodden, or Lois Rodden, if you're Lois Lane from Superman.
Female.
She's a woman.
Yeah.
And back in the day, she set up the Rodden rating for astrology charts. And it's all to do with how good the birth time is.
Yeah.
So there are several categories, and I'm just going to go over them.
Yeah.
So the Rodden rating AA means that it is absolutely accurate, and you have the birth certificate in hand, or you have a hospital printout in hand with the time.
Yeah.
Next, we have an A rating, which is hearsay, and this generally comes from someone who was there at the birth, who maybe an aunt or maybe the nurse, and they say, oh, it was in the afternoon at 2:00 because I was there and blah, 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 or you heard about it from somebody.
Yeah.
So that's really pretty good if you can get a birth time, because if they were there, they've got a good idea. Then we have B rating. Now, this is from biography. So you would get this for other people who would say what, and they may put it in their book and say, oh, well, I was born at, 6 a.m., blah, blah, blah. And that would be biographical. But you don't, as an astrologer, you don't have the birth certificate in hand.
Yeah. And generally in a biography, they're not going to be like, it was 6:11 a.m. They're going to say it was 6 a.m.
Well, yeah. Who knows what they're going to, but then it's B,
Yeah.
So then we have C,
which is caution.
Because the time is suspect.
Yeah.
So that is a challenge.
Yeah.
Then next we have the Rodden rating DD, which is dirty data, don't use. So we don't have any supporting documentation, and you're just stabbing in the dark.
Yeah, and that's often where there's a conflicting stories as well.
Well, this is it.
Yeah, where someone will say one thing and then someone else had said another thing, and it's like, oh no, the mom said this, and it's like, well,
it's still hearsay. Yeah,
exactly.
And then the final one is X rating, which is we know what day it was, but we've got no time whatsoever. Yeah. So this is the case we are at the moment with our friends.
X rating is not as racy and fun as you might expect.
Oh,
it's terrible.
Annoying.
It's terrible in astrology.
Yes, but if you're an astrologer, you really only want to be working with charts that've got a AA or an A rating, because if you don't know what the time was.
No.
And even major publications such as the Mountain Astrology will only accept articles where the charts referenced are AA rating. Yeah. So it is important to know what the time was, or realize how close was this time. Do you have a certificate? Is it in hand? Have you got a printout from the hospital or something? Yeah. So those are the Rodden ratings for astrology charts. Yeah. So yours is AA because your mother was there, she knows. Mine was AA because my mother was there.
And my mother and grandmother are both astrologers, so they...
Well, so was my mother, and she knew at the time. Yeah. Exactly. So we've got AA rating, and of course for my kids, I've got it down to the second, because I made my husband put 3 watches on to get it to the second, so I've got no argument with them. Yeah. But many people do not have times, and this is really what this rating is about.
Say things like, well, the baseball game was on, and my dad...
It was after lunch.
Yeah, it was after lunch. It was...
And then the postman came, and you've got all these long, hairy stories. So I'm hoping our listener has a good, solid birth time for their chart. Yeah. Because we don't know, but we live in hope.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is actually kind of a 2-part question, or we've made it so. Anyway, so it's a bit long, and this is wonderful. This is one of our fans of the podcast who is actually a bit more knowledgeable about astrology than some others, which is great. And it's great if you're a beginner as well, but it's really interesting sometimes to do like a bit of a deeper sort of question. And
I wonder what this question is.
I know, right? So this is all to say there's a bit of a preamble to the question. So here's the question. If the sun represents the self, which radiates outwardly beyond the confines of your control, and if the moon represents the inner self, why does anyone give equal platform to these 2 planets and the ascendant, as we say the Holy Trinity? Why is the ascendant given the same as the luminaries? He says, the ascendant has always felt like a carefully curated actor playing on television, which feels like a fallacy when discussing identity, which is used to distract from the larger truth, which is your sun and your moon. So that is an interesting take. And what say you? I mean, actually, let me just...
give me your 2 cents.
Yeah. I would leap ahead and say that as someone who has the sun and the moon in the same sign, Virgo, as I've famously discussed many a time. Famously, double Virgo. And I have Scorpio rising, which is a very different yet complementary sign to my sun and moon. I feel like as a person who lives in that holy trinity, I really feel that that they are equally balanced in my chart. I feel as though I am actually equal parts that Virgo, Scorpio.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm more Virgo than, proportionally than Scorpio. I feel like the Scorpio rising really does represent a third of my identity, and all of those other planets and how they interact and all that stuff, of course, is, that is thrown into the mix. But I feel like the ascendant isn't just a facade. It's not just an actor playing on screen. It is a deep part of your personality, because appearances and what's on the surface is important, and who you get to know deeply and who gets to know your core self and your inner core, like your moon. Like, very few people are going to get to know that moon. Everyone who meets you or talks to you on a Zoom call, or you answer the phone and have a 5-minute conversation with, they meet your ascendant.
Yeah.
Only, maybe 10% of those people get to know your sun sign, and maybe even 1% of that will get to know your moon, because they will be the ones who see you when you're sick, when you're angry, when you're at your worst, when you're in pain, when you're suffering, when you're, in your child pose or in your, fetal position on the floor. Only 1% of those people who ever meet you will get to know your moon sign. So the ascendant is really, in some ways, it's the most important, because that is what that's what more people see of you than anything else.
Absolutely.
And that's what I would say about that. How do you feel?
Right. So so these 3 points, the ascendant, sun, and moon, which we have spoken about at nauseum. So the ascendant is, your main keyword there is personality.
Yes.
So this is what you're saying. When you step outside your front door, it's showtime, you're wearing your personality. The clothes you wear, the hair you wear, or the hair you don't wear, or your color, or your shoes, or your gait, or your accessories, whatever it is you're presenting.
Your car, the way,
Yes, what you are presenting to those who see you in the street, who don't know you from Adam, that is actually your ascendant. You present it, and it's your shell.
Shell, yeah. And a shell is incredibly important.
Yes.
To any animal that has a shell.
Yes. So it's like a veil coming over. And this comes from the point that was rising on the eastern horizon when you were born, which is a very sensitive point.
Yeah, it's the moment you took a breath as a baby.
The initial breath.
So you aspired, you inspired, your soul, so to speak, whatever.
Breathed in the potentials at the moment.
At that second.
Yes. Exactly. So this is why the ascendant is so important, because anyone born on the same day as you is going to have the same sun, moon, XYZ positions, but the ascendant is critical at this point. So this is showing your personality and what you present.
Yeah.
And you see this when you go to cocktail parties. You see ascendants when you go on a first date. Everybody's super scrubbed up and plumped and plucked and what have you. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we get to the sun. Now the sun is it's like a layer of your being. Yeah. And this is your character.
Yeah.
This is really who you are when no one's looking.
Yeah.
So
your beliefs, your core self. Yeah.
Are you kicking the dog? Are you, whatever you're doing that you're not supposed to be doing? That is your core self. And that is the sun. It shows the actual core character of you. Whereas your personality can be changed by a fancy hat, a fur boa, or some lipstick. Your core character remains.
Yeah.
So whatever that sun sign is.
Yeah.
And then your next layer down, which is what you were just saying, is your moon sign, and that is your behavior. Yeah. It's your actual default knee-jerk reactions to life.
Like the amygdala in the brain.
Right. It's what do they call it? The crocodilian...
The reptilian brain.
The reptilian brain.
Well, exactly. It's like the core of the earth, too. It's like the crust is the personality, the external, the ascendant, and then the mantle is the sun, and then the core, that molten, magnetic, gooey, volcanic, hot core is the moon.
That's right. So when you meet people for the first time, or even people you work with on a day-to-day basis, you're sitting in the next cubicle to them, you're seeing their ascendant because that's what you can see.
Yes, totally.
But you don't get to know Bob in accounting, and that's only when you get to almost be friends, as it were, and you get to understand their character, that these are their interests, this is what they do.
And if you're in a Zoom call, you might not even see what's actually behind them. They might have a blur background or a fake background.
Well, your background in Zoom is your ascendant.
Yes.
It is a carefully curated collection of stuff behind you that is presenting you the way you want it, right? My Zoom background's different to yours. I mean, what they say, you need a plant, a bookcase, and a lamp. But either way, the colors, whatever you've got in your background in your Zoom is part of your ascendant.
Yeah.
And even things like your LinkedIn profile and your banner, that's your ascendant. You're presenting, you're choosing to present yourself with this image, that photo, and in this way.
And we understand the compulsion to say that should be less important. We understand that because we all want to be genuine. We all want to be authentic. We all want to bring our whole selves to work, in quotes. But it's just, it's the reality that in this day and age, especially, that surface is incredibly important. And it's not false. It's something that's part of you, but it also is something external. It's that part of you that shines outwardly and that protects you in some ways.
You chose to present.
Yeah.
You did. You're not. If you're going out in your pajamas in the street, you're choosing to do that, right?
Yes.
But if you're 100%. Choosing to be well groomed and well, you get served better in restaurants. We all know this. Yeah. And that's the ascendant you're presenting.
Yeah.
Whereas that your sun then is your core character, and you only really get to know that when you get to almost be friends with people, right? And you understand what's driving them. What do you have an interest? You don't know if they're playing hockey or, God, I don't know, rollerblading or whatever they're doing.
Right.
But as you meet someone, you're sitting on a bus, you're only seeing ascendants.
Yeah, totally.
And until you get to that sun, that will be your first next stop, saying, oh, hey, you've got a dog and a cat and this and that, and you play hockey, blah, 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 blah. And then you get to, if you are lucky, you will get to know them by their moon signs. Yeah. And one of the key notifications of getting to know people's behavior is if you get to know their moon sign is if you've seen them in their bare feet. So there's your mark. If you've got Tom, Dick, and Harry's in your life, have you seen them in their bare feet? Have they had a sleepover? Have you been in that situation where you're whatever it is?
Right.
And only then do you get to see their moon sign. And it takes a while, and you don't get to see everybody's moon.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that's kind of given some light on that question.
Absolutely. I think that's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the questions we got from one of our listeners was regarding interceptions, and she was saying that she's having difficulty understanding interceptions, and could we explain what they are?
Great idea.
So in a nutshell, an intercepted sign is a sign that exists in a house, but it doesn't have a house cusp.
This is one of those things that you will never get if you use whole sign houses.
No, but who does that?
Yeah, no one I know.
So, say you've got Aries is on the first house cusp, Taurus is fully encapsulated within the first house, and then Gemini is on the second house cusp. That makes Taurus an intercepted sign within your chart. And intercepted signs come in pairs, so if Taurus is intercepted, so is Scorpio.
Right.
What this also means is that one sign will have two house cusps as well, because it's just the way the chart moves.
Right.
So you would always get this with Placidus, which is what we use.
Yep.
But what the question really is that if you've got planets in an intercepted sign, how do you access them?
Right.
Because they don't have. So say you've got the sun in that Taurus. So this sun in Taurus does not have a cusp with which that Taurus is not on a cusp.
Yeah.
So what that means is that Venus doesn't have that house to rule, because Venus rules Taurus.
Yeah.
However, Venus will rule Libra, and Libra will have a house cusp in this chart, in my example chart.
Yeah.
So where you've got a chart where the intercepted sign is a sign that is ruled by a planet that rules two signs, this is okay, because Venus still has a way into your chart.
But if it's Leo, which is ruled by the sun, it wouldn't.
Exactly. So if you've got a Cancer ascendant, Leo intercepted, and therefore the sun doesn't have a house, and then Virgo on the next one, the sun doesn't have a house, and it works with the moon as well.
So would that behave like almost like the sun in the 12th house, or would that still be okay?
Well, any planets then in that Leo, intercepted in Leo, are mute.
Wow.
And they would probably need a lot of teasing and work to get their expression out into the chart.
The Cowardly Lion.
Well, you've got you've got the pussycat and the lion, right?
Aww.
And they're just there licking their paws at night. Not every Leo's out there going for the kill.
No.
But
we've all had a cat like that. All of us,
yes.
All of us cat ladies, people.
So you certainly get this with the sun and the moon. So what happens then is the sun doesn't have a house to rule. So it's got less say in the chart because clearly another planet's hogging more house cusps.
Yeah.
And that goes for the moon as well. If Cancer is intercepted, any planets in Cancer are mute until you develop them. Right? But you also get it when you've got a sign such as if Scorpio is intercepted, say, in the first house, then Mars, as the ruler of Scorpio, will be able to then rule the Aries house.
Yeah.
But Pluto has no house. Pluto is demoted and has less say in the chart. And this comes for...
So Pluto hates that.
Well, yes. So it comes if Scorpio is intercepted, if Pisces is intercepted, Neptune has no voice. And if Aquarius is intercepted, Uranus has no voice.
Right.
So planets that are then in intercepted sign, the astrologer who's doing your chart reading would say, you need to develop these planets in some way, and the astrologer would have to find ways for you to access planets in an intercepted sign. Yeah. And particularly, not only that, you've got the two problems. The other problem is that the sun, the moon, Pluto, Uranus, or Neptune haven't got a voice in the chart. Therefore, they're taking a back seat. So other planets are stepping forward and saying, hey, I'm running the show. And if it's Mars, Mars is running the show. So you do have to assess how effective each planet is by how much it gets to rule of a chart.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. So we're talking only about here house rulers.
Right.
Because that's all we can do, right?
Yeah.
Whereas you would talk about hemisphere rulers and quadrant rulers. But if you've got the house and it would be in the middle of one of these one of these houses, it's planets in there, and the actual planet itself would struggle to express itself.
Right.
Now, say, for instance, it was Scorpio, and Pluto, therefore, doesn't have a house to rule. If Pluto is somewhere else in the chart, and God forbid it's retrograde as well, it's getting double demotion. It's in the back seats. It's right out the back door, lining up to get in.
Right. And I mean, I think a lot of people would probably think, well, if it's Pluto, that's fine,
Maybe, but other planets are stepping forward.
Yeah. I mean, we have strong Scorpio placements. We would not think that about Pluto. We like Pluto.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Good answer.
So, for example, looking at a personal chart, my chart, I have Sagittarius intercepted in the 5th house, and I have Gemini intercepted in the 11th house. So this is Jupiter, which is not having a house to rule. However, it does rule my Pisces house. Mm-hmm. And again, with the Gemini, Mercury doesn't have a Gemini cusp, but by golly, it's got a Virgo cusp. So in that case, it's kind of okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Do you have anything in those houses?
No.
Wow.
Yeah, so, but that's what you're looking for. You're looking for things and you're paying attention to it.
Yeah.
Because the planet that's ruling the double hit houses, of which I have, say, for instance, my 1st and 2nd house is ruled by the sun.
Right.
And therefore my 7th and 8th house is ruled by Uranus.
Yeah.
They've got extra say.
Yeah.
Whereas Jupiter has, although it's got the one house, it doesn't have the full house that it would normally.
Yeah. And hello, astrologer.
Well, yes. Say no more.
Yeah, Uranus steps up. All right, a next listener asks, why are the angles of astrology, and that would be the ascendant, the descendant, the IC, and the MC, why are they more important? So 1st house, 4th house, 7th house, 10th house cusps, why are they more important than the rest of the house cusps in astrology? Mm. So that's a good question. Mm. And that speaks to a bit of what we were talking about before with why the ascendant is important. But it really does also speak to your house system of preference. Oh, so
there's a topic,
right? Yeah, and exactly, it's controversial. But I think one reason that they are important is that they are consistent across a lot of the house systems. That's one thing that is consistent is your ascendant, your descendant, and yes. the MC and the IC, and. So your ascendant descendant is the horizon when you were born. Exactly. So that's important because that's the moment you were born. That's the moment you took breath. Exactly. And the midheaven is the highest position the sun will reach that day. Yeah. So it's a point. Yeah. There are different, you can go to Wikipedia if you want. And Wikipedia has actually got a pretty good page on house systems.
Well, house systems themselves are, I mean, it's fraught, isn't it? This is the topic that keeps people in astrology bars after conferences.
Yeah, and there's geographic versus time-based, and I can't remember what they're called exactly, but then there's a whole house system, and then there's the thing where there are no intercepted thing, and it's just everything is zero, so whatever your cusp is, like if I have Scorpio rising, for example, it just shifts to zero, so I would be, instead of 2 degrees Scorpio, which I am, it would be 0, and then everything would be like 0, 0, 0, 0 going around. And that's fine, but it's for me, that's just like rounding up. Why would you do that?
Well, why would you do that?
I'd much rather, have a more scientific.
So in general, if you say you've got an ascendant of, 10 degrees Virgo, you're going to have a descendant of 10 degrees Pisces. That's the horizon when you were born.
Right.
And the midheaven will stay in many house systems. That position, whether it's in the 9th house or the 10th house, is neither here nor there. But the position the sun reaches that day remains.
Yeah.
So these are points.
Yeah, and they're different depending on the time of the year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then the actual other house cusps, the intermediate house cusps, are either calculated by time coming up over the ascendant or just dividing it by 3, which is porphyry.
Yeah.
Pick and choose.
Right.
Choose your poison, But the point is that it's all hanging on the ascendant, descendant, and the midheaven IC.
Which is why they're more important.
Yes, because they are specific points that can be measured, whereas your house cusps per se, whatever house system you're using, are going to change.
Yes, and that's why they are less important, because they are so not arbitrary, certainly, but once you decide on a house system,
that's the question.
That is your
So I use Placidus unless I'm doing horoscopes and I'm using 0 Aries, but there's a reason for that. And you're using Placidus?
Oh, yeah, Placidus for sure. Yeah. It's just what I'm used to, and also honestly, I know we've talked about this before, but it's just one of those things where I like my chart better in Placidus. And I've tried a couple different ones. And I've tried Coke houses because that was apparently a thing for a while. And it's very similar to Placidus. But the reason I chose not to go with that one is because it sticks my Venus in the 12th house, and I can't have that.
You can't have that. No. Good Lord, no.
I'm not
Well, this is it. They generally say that the house system you use is the one that your astrology teacher had.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a laugh, really.
Yeah.
But, once you pick your house system, the midheaven's still in the same position.
Yeah.
The ascendant is still in the same position,
right.
but the other house cusps will change.
And that's why it's less important.
Yeah. So when you're dealing with hemispheres and quadrants, this is why they are powerful, because they are hanging off the angles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, I hope that answers the question.
I hope so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can let us know if not.
Yeah, absolutely.
So our final question of the day is a bit of a badass goddess question in addition to
we love badass goddess.
Badass goddesses, by the way, if you are new to the podcast, you can go to bizpink.net. That's kind of my thing. It's one of my things. It's an art thing. And we love goddesses because they are badass women in history, etc. And anyway, our reader asks, we see pantheons of deities influencing types of astrology, including Greco-Roman, you get your Mars, your Venus, your Uranus, etc., your Norse, your Egyptian, the Hindu pantheons. We have the Arabic parts in astrology. We have all these pantheons that are kind of wrapped up into the traditional Western astrology. Are there lesser known pantheons associated with astrology, and therefore lesser known astrological practices for someone to dig deeper into the nuances, evolution, history, etc., which has culminated in Western astrology? Super interesting.
Yes. I would say that at this point that most of what we're talking about in Western astrology and what we do, you and I, is based on the Arabic, the Greco-Roman, and what came forward. The classical Greek stuff that came through.
However, 100% that is absolutely true. And one of the things that's interesting lately has been the discovery of new bodies and new things in the Kuiper belt, in the asteroid belt.
Trans-Neptunian objects.
Exactly. Sedna would be a great example of one.
Yeah.
All of these things are based on, and of course, astronomy and astrology have a common root. One would not exist without the other, by which I mean astronomy would not exist without astrology, because up until the Renaissance, they were the same science.
Yes.
And Galileo, Copernicus, they were astrologers before they were astronomers.
Correct.
And this is why we have astronomy. Astronomy is because astrologers got interested in telescopes and then discovered, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But back in the day, they were the same exact science, and they were equally important about defining the future of kings and your state and your nation and predicting the crops and watching the seasons and all of these things were equally important in human history and human evolution. So the reason we have astronomy is because of astrology. And even Neil deGrasse Tyson admits this. On his darkest moments, he will admit this. So what we have is now we have astronomers when a new body is discovered through the telescopes and the beautiful imaging that we do of the universe. We find these new bodies and they are named by astronomers. However, they have really interesting naming formats. So you'll find that they'll be named after different gods and different pantheons. And they have certain naming conventions that are based on, is this a moon of a certain planet that is known? And for example, like all the moons of Saturn or all the moons of, Jupiter would be in a certain type of astronomical family. And that would be based on a name from Greek mythology or some mythology. And so we have things that are like Sedna, for example. Sedna is, and I can't remember the name of the that one weird cigar-shaped one, Uamamomo something. Anyway, it's a Hawaiian god, I believe. Right. It's like, meaning the traveler or something like that. Mm-hmm. So we have, and also, I mean, the word planet right there means like the wanderer.
Yes.
So those were the planets that wandered around in the sphere of the universe, like when you were in the Greek times, in ancient Greece, you'd watch the sky and all of the fixed stars because they were fixed against the blackness of night. Yeah. And the things that moved were the things in our solar system because those are the only ones that you could actually see with the naked eye moving. So those are the wanderers, quote unquote. Those are the planets. And now we have the ability to see with telescopes. Deeper.
So it's Eris. Look at Eris.
Eris, exactly. Discovered in 2005 by Chris Brown and company.
Mike Brown.
Sorry. Thank you, Mike Brown. Chris Brown's different. Shout out to Chris Brown. Mike Brown, thank you very much. So, and he has also, Mike Brown famously said he loves astrologers because we are interested in the sky for the same different reasons as astronomers. And I love that about Mike Brown. But Sedna, for example, Sedna is the goddess in...
But this is it. It was only named when? Since 2006.
Exactly.
So what we have is we've got, let me say it, we've got American astronomers naming new bodies discovered.
Based on all of these international pantheons because they want to be inclusive. They want to represent the diversity of the world and they don't want to just be like, oh, it's all Greco-Roman. No,
they're moved away from that. They're moving on to this.
Exactly. But they're doing it in a very systematic way. So they're like, oh, these are all the moons of this one planet will be named after gods of the underworld or something like that. And so it's different gods of the underworld from different pantheons. Yeah. So I think that's super interesting and very kind of crazy if you think about it. I mean, they might just name it like, B627A5,
I think they do to start with,
They do to start with, but they don't have to change it to something poetic, but they do. And I think that's lovely. And they don't just name it like parsnip or pomegranate. They could name it anything. They could name it like IKEA or, God forbid, we give them the idea of naming it after corporations. But I love that they're naming it after, gods and goddesses from all these different pantheons. I think that's wonderful. And since I mentioned Sedna, like let's just say quickly, Sedna, the goddess of the ocean in Inuit mythology. She is North American goddess. Yes. Yeah, and she was this tragic story of this maiden who the raven god came, the trickster god came, and she was a beautiful maiden, and she turned away all these suitors, and her father was sort of distraught because you want to marry off your beautiful daughter, and finally the trickster raven god came and tricked her father into marrying her off to him, and he took her away, and she cried and wanted to be set free. And her father eventually sailed to her rescue because he was a fisherman. And but the raven god caused this huge storm and this typhoon, and he threatened to sink the father's ship. And so he eventually tossed Sedna overboard and was like, "No, you're on your own." And she tried to climb back into the boat, and he sort of cut off her fingers, so she had to sink to the bottom. And her fingers became the sea creatures of the ocean, the seals and the whales and the porpoises and the dolphins. And she eventually sank to the bottom and became the protector and the representative of all of the ocean's teeming life. And this is but she's also Inuit vengeful. Myth. It's an Inuit myth, Yes. And so she's the vengeful, but yet wonderful protector of all the ocean's creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that these people who are actually doing these namings now, which are, let's face it, North American guys, they are
Yes,
they
to
are
be
naming them after Inuit and First Nations, North American First Nations myths. And that's, so there's been a total shift. No one's getting named after a Greek anymore. This is the focus.
They're all taken now.
Well, yes.
So they're mining all these other mythologies, which is wonderful.
It is.
Yeah.
So I think it has to do with the time that the item was discovered.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, obviously there's a colonial aspect to all life, and we have to, own that. But then at the
historically,
same time, admit that we're moving forward, and there are things that are now being named after these wonderful, beautiful, lesser known mythologies, and all these sort of smaller pantheons, as you say in your question.
But the point is that the people who are making the namings are actually naming them after their localized mythologies.
Yeah.
Whereas if it is, say, in 50 years' time, I don't know, maybe, Japan becomes great at doing astronomy, they're going to start naming them after Japanese mythology people.
Yeah.
So that's actually where I think it's coming from.
Yes, great point. Good luck us pronouncing them.
Yes, and of course that's why we've got more females in, because that's the trend. Women are equal to men. They weren't like 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And so you got all this sort of
Eris
thing.
And all them.
That was the turning point for this.
Goddesses.
Yeah, as the telescopes get better and they go deeper, they'll find more and more items.
For sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Eventually we'll have them just named after cartoon characters.
Because it's the guy behind the telescope who's making the naming. Yes,
the guy behind the guy.
But kudos to them for putting in the female and putting in the moving away from that, working with 21st century.
Systems. I mean, let's not forget Eris was named Xena casually before she was actually officially named Eris.
Yes,
and if you don't know who Xena is, go look it up. It's a great relic of the 90s.
Exactly. Okay, so for this episode, this was our 125th episode. We did some Q&A from our listeners. We thank you to everybody who sent in a question. It really helps us to, guide ourselves and where we're going with our podcast and what we're talking about and what matters to you as well, which is important.
Absolutely. So
we want to thank you for listening. If you found value in this episode, please do consider sharing it with anybody who would be interested. You can email us at starzology@gmail.com. And if you want to send in questions for our next Q&A, which will be to 150 episodes, please go to the podcast, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and click on the top link. And you can send a text directly with your question. Please leave your name and probably what city you're coming from, because it would be great for us to know that as well. So I also encourage you to follow Arwynne
at mspink.net. That's mspink.net. I talk about politics and astrology and history and books and movies and whatnot.
Yeah, all sorts of other interesting things, which is great. So I want to thank everyone for listening. And Arwynne, I want to thank you for joining us again today.
Thank you, Alison. This has been great.
And thanks to our listeners. Thanks so much. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the two main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer or someone who's learning astrology or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.